The red dust of the New Mexico Territory rose in angry clouds as William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid, and his regulators rode into the blistered outpost of Ojo del Muerto. It was the scorching summer of 1878, and the Kid's name already echoed across the borderlands, a whisper of youth, speed, and lethal intent. The sun was a blinding tyrant overhead, and the silence of the street was heavier than the heat. Billy, barely 20, sat tall in the saddle. His Colt, .45, the Peacemaker, holstered low and tied to his thigh. His sheepskin vest was coated in fine grit, his wide-brimmed Stetson pulled low. Beside him, Tom O'Folliard, his closest ally, spat a stream of chewing tobacco into the dirt. Charlie Bowder and Doc Skurlock brought up the rear, their eyes scanning the windows of the saloon and the empty livery stable. "Dead town, Billy," Doc Skurlock muttered, rubbing the stubble on his chin. "Smells like trouble mixed with bad whiskey." They dismounted near the general store, the clink of spurs against the wooden boardwalk, an intrusion in the overwhelming quiet. Jose Chavez y Chavez, the quietest of the gang, pointed toward a darkened alley where a skeletal mule was tethered. "Look there, Patron," Jose said, his voice a low rasp. "Someone's been waiting for more than shade." As they moved toward the store's water trough, they heard it, a low, rhythmic, almost desperate sound, coming from the dusty confines of the attached blacksmith shop. A faint, mournful clank, clank, clank. It was the sound of metal against rock, or worse, against flesh. Billy exchanged a look with Tom. They drew their Winchesters quickly and cautiously approached the back of the shop. The air inside was thick and hot, smelling of burnt coal and dried blood. Slumped against the forge, chained by a heavy iron collar around her neck to the thick, unforgiving anvil, was a woman. She was young, dressed in rags that had once been a respectable denim dress, her face caked with grime and tears. Her wrists were raw from fighting the cuffs that bound her hands behind her back, but it wasn't the chains that held their attention. It was the ferocious, defiant spark in her eyes, even in her misery. Billy lowered his rifle. "Hold your fire, boys." He took a step toward her. "Who did this, ma'am, and why?" The woman, Martha Jenkins, struggled against the collar, the iron biting into her flesh. Her voice was raspy, dry as the desert sand. Sheriff Gideon Black said I was property." Tom O'Folliard swore softly. "Property? What in the blazes did she do, kid?" Martha finally managed to speak a full sentence, her voice breaking. "I took flour, 2 handfuls. My youngest, little Will, he's got the fever. Starvin', mister. Just starvin'." Doc Skurlock stepped forward, his former medical instinct overriding his caution. He examined the raw skin around her throat. "That Sheriff Black. He's a mean son of a bitch even for a lawman. Heard he's more a cattle baron's dog than a servant of the people." Billy knelt down, eye level with the woman. He didn't touch the chains, just looked into her burning eyes. "Flour for a feverish boy. And he left you here to blister and starve for it." Martha nodded, tears finally rolling through the grime on her cheeks. "He said I was an example, said the next one would hang from the water tower. He took my boy too, Billy. Took Will and left him with the preacher. But I saw Black's men watching the mission road as I was dragged here. They're waiting." A cold, hard line settled around Billy's mouth. He pulled a slender lockpick from his boot and worked the manacles expertly, the tension in the room so tight you could almost hear the desert silence outside. The chain fell with a final, heavy clunk onto the dirt floor. "Sheriff Black," Billy murmured, testing the name. "Got himself some hired muscle, I reckon. Who is he working for, Martha? Who's the Baron pulling the strings?" "Randall Thorne," Martha whispered, holding her bruised throat. "He owns the land, the railway deal, and the sheriff. Black is just the whip." Billy rose, his young face suddenly old and dangerous. He pushed his Stetson back, revealing the sharp, boyish angles of his features. "We ain't running no more, boys. Not today." He looked at Martha, the sun catching the dust motes dancing in the air. "You tell me where your boy is, ma'am, and where Sheriff Black holds up. I owe him a lesson in property rights." Martha pointed weakly towards the dusty main street. His office. It's the only brick building near the saloon. But mister, he's got 2 hired guns, the McKay brothers. They're snakes, and they're mean. Billy smiled. A quick, dangerous flash of white. Snakes don't scare us, ma'am. They just slow us down. He turned to Doc Scurlock. Doc, you get Martha some water and clothes. Charlie, you and Tom take the high ground on that mesa. Jose, you ride out to the edge of town. Find out who's watching the mission. We need eyes. As the gang mobilized, Jose Chavez mounted his horse, riding silent as a ghost toward the desert's edge. He disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. Moments later, he returned, galloping hard. "Patron, they ain't watching the mission," Jose panted, pulling his horse to a dusty stop. "They're watching this street, 3 of them, 2 by the water tower, 1 on the roof of the bank. They saw us ride in. We're locked down." Billy's hand instinctively went to the butt of his peacemaker. The town, which had felt quiet, now felt like a trap sprung shut. The desert wind whipped a funnel of dust between the buildings, and the air crackled with a new, immediate danger. "Well, I'll be hog-tied," Billy said, his eyes narrowed, calculating. "Looks like the sheriff decided to bring the fight to the kids' front door. Get ready, boys. We're gonna have to earn our water." The sun began its slow, agonizing retreat, but the heat in Ojo del Muerto refused to break. Billy and his regulators holed up in the dusty back room of the general store, using barrels of pickled goods and sacks of beans for cover. The windows were too exposed, so the only light came from the dusty cracks in the wooden walls, giving the space an air of oppressive, tense confinement. "All right, let's lay it out," Billy said, tracing a rough map in the grit on a wooden crate. His voice was low, quick, and devoid of the swagger he usually reserved for saloons. This was business. Jose saw 3 of them, 1 on the bank roof, that's a lookout, 2 by the water tower, pistoleros, maybe the McKay boys Martha warned us about. Tom O'Folliard cleaned his Winchester repeater, the metallic sound sharp in the silence. 3 against 5, kid. Easy odds for us. We ride out, flank 'em, and it's done before midnight. Doc Scurlock shook his head, running a finger over the map Billy had drawn. "Too loud, Tom. We ride out now. They'll scatter and run to Sheriff Black. He's got the whole town. We want Black, we need quiet. We need to cut the wires before we take the fence." Charlie Baudre, usually silent, spoke up, his eyes cold and focused. "The lookout on the bank. He's the wire. Take him out and Black's blind until morning." Billy looked at Jose Chavez, the gang's expert tracker and scout. "Jose, you got the lay of the land. How do we get to that bank roof without stirring up every mangy dog in this dusty heap?" Jose pointed to the general store's neighboring building, a livery stable. "The stable opens onto the alley. Back end is low. We can use the roof of the stable to jump the gap to the bank, but it's a tight spot. 1 loose floorboard, 1 nervous jump, and the deal's off." "Too risky," Doc argued. "We need intel on the sheriff's movements. If he stays in that brick office, he's dug in like a tick. Then we send a scout," Billy decided, his plan forming fast. "But not one of us. Too recognizable. Doc, you were a sawbones before all this mess. You look more like a traveling salesman than a bandit. You go." Doc adjusted his glasses, a look of grim resignation on his face. "Selling what, kid? Trouble?" "Tell Black you're looking for a bounty," Billy instructed. "Say you saw us heading north into the Badlands, just enough to ease his mind. See who he's talking to, see where the McKay boys are headed." Doc Scurlock, leaving his rifle behind and tucking a small, easily concealable derringer into his belt, slipped out the back entrance. The dust-caked streets swallowed him instantly. The rest of the gang waited, the air thick with sweat and expectation. An hour later, Doc returned, his face a mask of dry fury. "The sheriff is in his office, drinking beer and boasting," Doc reported, pouring a handful of grit out of his boots. "The McKay boys, Caleb and Silas, they're not moving until nightfall. They're camped out in the back of the saloon. But here's the kicker, Billy. They ain't watching for us. They're waiting for the preacher to leave the mission. They're gonna snatch the boy." Billy slammed his fist onto the crate, startling a field mouse. "They're using the boy as bait." They know we'll come for Martha, and they figure we'll come for the child. Sheriff Black is smarter than he looks. We move now, then, Tom urged, his hand gripping his Colt. We hit the saloon, scatter those snakes, and get the kid to Martha. No, Billy said, slowly shaking his head. The saloon is a death trap. Too many witnesses, too much space to swing a rope, and too many folks who hate us more than they hate Black. We take 'em one at a time, the lookout first. We blind the sheriff, then we hit the McKay boys when they move for the boy. Billy stood up, strapping his gun belt tighter. The mission is a mile out of town. The trail runs right by the old canyon wall. That's where the McKay boys will make their move. Jose, you know that trail like the back of your hand. Charlie, you're the best shot. You'll be the hammer. The plan. Jose Chavez y Chavez would ride ahead, establishing the ambush point at the canyon wall, a narrow, defensible choke point. Charlie Bowder would take up a high position, using his powerful Winchester to neutralize the McKay boys' horses. Billy and Tom would then ride fast to flank the ambush, neutralizing the targets. Doc Scurlock would remain in Ojo del Muerto to watch the sheriff's office for any signs of movement. We ride at dusk, Billy commanded, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying absolute authority. We take the McKay boys. We get the boy back to Martha. And tomorrow we deal with Sheriff Black and his ranch boss, Randall Thorne. The first blood will be taken on the trail. As the last sliver of sun dipped behind the western peaks, casting long, menacing shadows across the desert floor, the 4 regulators mounted their horses. The creak of the leather saddles was the only sound of their departure. The air was cool now, carrying the faint, distant howls of coyotes, a sound of the wild, and a sound of imminent violence. Billy looked back at the town, a silhouette of false promise and hidden corruption. He felt the weight of Martha's pain and the responsibility of his promise. He was an outlaw, but tonight his cause was just. "Let's ride, boys," Billy said, kicking his horse gently. "Let's show those bastards what real law looks like." The moon was a thin, cold scythe hanging over the canyon wall, a natural ambush spot where the desert trail narrowed into a path between 2 jagged rock faces. The air, cooled by the night, smelled of sagebrush and damp earth from a forgotten rain. Jose Chavez y Chavez was already nestled high on the ridge, his eyes, used to the darkness, watching the trail. He signaled with a silent hand gesture when he heard the faint, rhythmic thudding of horse hooves approaching from the direction of the mission. Below, Billy and Tom O'Folliard pressed themselves against the rough stone. Billy's heart hammered a steady, calm rhythm against his ribs, the drumming of a man who lived perpetually on the edge of the gunfight. Charlie Bowder was positioned directly opposite Jose, his Winchester resting on a flat rock, sighting down the dark path. "Here they come," Billy whispered, checking the cylinder of his Colt. "Pistoleros always ride heavy and slow when they think they got an easy job." 2 figures on horseback, the McKay brothers, materialized out of the gloom. Caleb McKay, the elder, was a massive man with a greasy handlebar mustache. Silas, younger and quicker, rode with his hand already resting on the butt of his sidearm. They were leading a second horse, presumably for the preacher and the captive boy, Will. As they entered the narrowest part of the gorge, Caleb started humming a tuneless, morbid song. Silas chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Hear that, Caleb? That's the sound of silence," Silas drawled, the sound echoing off the rocks. "Preacher ain't gonna put up no fight. Just gonna hand over the runt and his blessings." "Less talkin', more ridin'," Caleb grumbled. "Sheriff Black wants that little runt back in town by sunup. Says we're gonna teach the whole territory a lesson on stealing from the Thorne Ranch." Just as Silas finished his sentence, Charlie Bowder's Winchester cracked, a sharp, deafening explosion in the confined space. The shot was aimed precisely, not at the men, but at the chest of Caleb's horse. The poor beast screamed, buckled violently, and crashed, pinning Caleb's leg beneath its weight. The ambush was sprung. Silas Mackay instantly dove from his saddle, drawing his pistol and firing wildly toward the ridge where the sound originated. His shots chipped uselessly against the stone. "Flank him, Tom!" Billy yelled, stepping out from behind cover, his Colt already spitting fire. He moved with the fluid, frightening speed that had made him famous. Billy's first shot grazed Silas's left shoulder, knocking the man's hat off and spinning him around. Silas dropped to his knee, trying to get a bead on the kid, but Tom O'Folliard's repeater barked a fierce response. The bullet tore into Silas's thigh, and the younger Mackay screamed, collapsing fully onto the ground, clutching his bleeding leg. Caleb, trapped beneath his dying horse, struggled and cursed, trying desperately to pull his own pistol free. Billy walked slowly towards the wounded man, the smoke from his Colt curling around his fingers. The smell of sulphur mixed with the dust. "Drop the gun, Caleb, or I drop the hammer." Caleb hesitated for a long, agonizing second, his eyes wide with fear now that the tables were turned. He finally let the heavy pistol fall into the dust. Tom O'Folliard tied up the whimpering Silas while Doc Scurlock, who had ridden up after the first shot, checked on the injured horse and gave a cursory glance to Silas's wound. "You're lucky, boy," Doc muttered to Silas. "Could have been your kneecap. Now who sent you out here to collect the boy?" Silas spat blood and dirt. "Go to hell, bandit!" Billy kicked the fallen pistol away and knelt beside the struggling Caleb. He put the cold barrel of his Colt right on the man's forehead. "Don't be a fool, Caleb. We ain't the law, but we ain't merciful either. You tell me about Sheriff Black's real plans or you die right here, pinned under your own dead weight." The sight of Billy the Kid, young and calm with a deadly instrument, broke the older man. Caleb trembled. The boy. The mission was a feint. They ain't at the mission. Black told us to make a show of riding out, but the boy. The boy is hidden in the Thorn Ranch slaughterhouse. Black knew we'd follow the obvious trail. He set a trap for you, kid. A trap. Billy's eyes flashed with anger. A slaughterhouse. That son of a bitch. He stood up. "How many men, Caleb? Is Randall Thorne there?" "Thorne's gone to Santa Fe," Caleb stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "But Black's got 5 men guarding the ranch hands and another 5 waiting at the slaughterhouse. He's got the whole damn place locked down, kid. Said he'd feed your bodies to the pigs if you showed up." Billy looked at his men. "He was counting on us riding loud into the saloon. Now he's counting on us riding hot and furious to the ranch." He looked back down at Caleb, his face impassive. "You chained a woman for flour, and you were going to use a feverish boy as bait. That ain't justice, partner. That's just being a dirty yellow dog." Caleb's eyes pleaded. "Please, kid, don't leave me here. Let me go. I'll ride out, I swear it." Billy didn't say a word. He simply unbuckled the iron manacles he had carried from the blacksmith shop, the very chains used on Martha. He locked Caleb's hands behind his back and tightly cinched the chain around his neck, securing him to a massive, immobile boulder at the canyon wall. "You wanted to make an example, Caleb?" Billy's voice was dangerously soft. "Now you are one. You'll be found in the morning, if you last that long." Billy mounted his horse, motioning for Tom to do the same. Jose and Charlie gave a swift, merciful end to Silas with a single bullet. They didn't have time for injured captives. "Slaughterhouse, boys," Billy announced, his voice ringing with renewed purpose. "We ain't going in quiet anymore. We're going to ride hard and fast. We'll meet Black on his own turf." They rode out, leaving Caleb Mackay behind, screaming impotently at the vast, uncaring desert. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. The kid's vengeance had begun. The Thorn Ranch was a sprawling scar on the landscape, built not for comfort but for intimidation. The slaughterhouse, a low, massive wooden structure reeking of ammonia and dried blood, sat isolated from the main complex. The air around it was heavy and metallic. Billy the Kid and his 4 regulators approached before dawn, guided by the rising silver crescent of the moon. They dismounted in a hidden arroyo, the dry creek bed offering concealment. Doc Scurlock carefully loaded fresh rounds into his rifle, his face grim. 10 men, kid," Doc reminded him. 5 here, 5 with the ranch hands. That's even odds, but they're dug in. "They're not dug in, Doc. They're bored," Billy corrected, looking through his field glasses. "The guards are lax, expecting us to ride in full of fury, not sneak in like rats." We split. "Jose and Charlie, you take out the 2 guards on the south side. No noise, knives only. Tom and I will hit the 2 by the main door. Doc, you cover us from the top of that grain silo. You'll keep the ranch hands busy if they try to come help." The plan was a brutal ballet of stealth and violence. Jose Chavez moved like a shadow, disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, a swift, sickening grunt echoed from the south corner, followed by the soft thud of a falling body. Charlie Bowdra gave a barely audible whistle, the signal they were done. Billy and Tom moved on the 2 guards by the front door. Billy was faster. He didn't use a knife. His hand shot out, grasping the throat of the first guard, pulling him into the shadow of the wall. Tom delivered a swift, hard blow with the butt of his pistol to the second man's temple. Both fell silently, 2 bodies replacing 2 shadows. "That leaves Sheriff Black and 1 more inside with the boy," Billy murmured. He kicked open the heavy, fly-ridden wooden door of the slaughterhouse. The interior was a chamber of horrors. Carcasses hung from hooks, the air thick with the stench of death. In the center, huddled near a pile of salt, was a terrified small boy, Will, Martha's son. Standing over him, pistol drawn, was Sheriff Gideon Black. Black was exactly as Martha described, bulky, sweaty, and his face was a roadmap of cruelty and arrogance. Next to him stood his final man, a lean, nervous man named Cooper. "Well, well," Black sneered, adjusting the brim of his hat. "The notorious Billy the Kid. Heard you were coming, you half-pint outlaw. Took you long enough to fall into my trap." Billy leveled his Colt. "The boy first, Sheriff. Let him go, and we talk terms." "Terms?" Black laughed, a sound like gravel rolling down a hill. He pressed the cold muzzle of his pistol against the boy's head. "The only term here is that you drop your guns and walk away, or I blow his little brains out and feed you to the pigs out back." He stole flour, Sheriff." Billy's voice was low, steady, and dangerously calm. "Just flour. You chained his mother to an anvil and used the child as bait. You got no honor, no code. You're just a bully with a badge." Black shifted his weight, momentarily distracted by the moral challenge. It was the moment Billy was waiting for. "Cooper! Shoot the kid!" Black roared. Cooper fumbled with his rifle, but he was too late. Charlie Bowdra, who had slipped inside with Jose, fired from the shadows of the hanging meat. Cooper's rifle clattered harmlessly to the floor, and the man fell with a surprised look on his face. Black was faster. He shoved the boy away and fired at Billy. The bullet grazed the wood next to Billy's head. The ensuing duel was a blur of smoke and thunder. Billy sidestepped the first shot, his own return fire instantaneous and deafening. He didn't just fire, he aimed. Black grunted as a bullet hit him in the shoulder, knocking his aim wildly off. The sheriff, realizing he was outmatched in speed, dropped his gun and dove behind a stack of curing hides. "Don't shoot. I'm the law. You'll hang for this, kid." "The law died when you chained that woman, Sheriff," Billy retorted, advancing slowly, the hammer of his Colt cocked back. The click echoed in the large room. Black, panicking, burst from behind the hides, scrambling toward the back exit. Billy fired once more. The bullet hit Black in the kneecap. The sheriff screamed, collapsing onto the bloody floor, trying to crawl away. Billy walked up to the broken man, kicking the pistol out of Black's grasp. He looked down at the sheriff, sweaty, defeated, and cowardly. "The McKay boys are dead, Sheriff, and your boss, Thorne, he's not here to save you." Billy signaled to Tom O'Folliard, who quickly secured the terrified boy and handed him over to Jose. Billy's final act of justice was harsh and final. He used the very chains he had brought with him, fastening the sheriff to a massive hook where a steer had recently hung. He wasn't going to kill him outright. He was going to leave him for the ranch hands, the very people Black had oppressed, to find. "You'll hang, Sheriff," Billy said, his voice cold, "but not by my rope. You'll hang by your own cruelty." The gang quickly mounted up, taking the boy Will with them. As they rode hard back towards Ojo del Muerto in the pale light of dawn, the ranch was a scene of defeated silence. The final stage of the reckoning was complete. The morning air was surprisingly crisp as Billy and his regulators rode back into the dusty streets of Ojo del Muerto. The town was beginning to stir, saloon doors creaked open, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the perennial dust. Doc Scurlock took the boy Will gently from Jose's saddle. The small child, worn down by fever and terror, was quickly reunited with his mother Martha back at the general store. The reunion was silent, a desperate clasping of hands and bodies, and it was enough. Billy stood near the water trough, washing the gunpowder residue from his hands, watching the scene. The relief was a temporary, fragile thing, a thin layer of water over the eternal desert. Tom O'Folliard looked at the kid, his expression sober. The ranch hands will find black soon enough. The sheriff's body will be swinging from that hook before noon. We gotta move, Billy. Every lawman from here to Santa Fe will be on our trail for this. We move, Billy agreed, buckling his gun belt tight. But first, a message needs to be sent. He pulled a handful of silver dollars from his pocket and scattered them onto the dusty counter of the general store, enough to keep Martha and Will fed and safe for months. "Ma'am," Billy said, tipping his hat to Martha, who still held her son tightly, "your boy is safe. The sheriff won't bother you again. Go north. Find the rail line and take it to California. Don't look back." Martha looked at the young outlaw, the man who had risked his life for 2 handfuls of flour. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't utter a word of thanks. A simple, powerful nod was enough. As the regulators turned their horses toward the open desert, a small crowd of townsfolk had gathered, mostly silent, staring at the 5 outlaws. They knew what had happened. They didn't need to see the body on the ranch to know the sheriff was gone. Justice had ridden into town on a fast horse and a quick colt. Suddenly a voice cracked through the silence. A nervous, aging man, the preacher from the mission. "Billy the Kid, you murdered the law. You're still an outlaw." Billy paused, turning his horse around slowly. He looked at the preacher, then at the silent, fearful townsfolk. "I didn't murder the law, preacher." Billy's voice carried clearly, resonating with the finality of the desert. "I murdered corruption. The law wasn't here for this woman and her starving boy. Only the outlaw was. You remember that when Sheriff Black is replaced by another dog of Randall Thorne." He paused, letting the silence swallow his words. Then, with a practiced, casual flourish, he pulled his Colt and fired 3 quick shots into the sign above the sheriff's now empty office, leaving 3 neat bullet holes that spelled out an unmistakable message of defiance. "Now, we ride," Billy commanded. The regulators galloped out of Ojo del Muerto, their horses kicking up a fresh plume of red dust. They didn't slow down until they reached the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Apache National Forest, pushing deeper into the shadows of the mountains. Days later, the posse arrived from Santa Fe. They found the body of Sheriff Black, swaying slowly on a meat hook at the Thorne Ranch slaughterhouse. They found the captured Caleb McKay, dehydrated and broken, still chained to the boulder in the canyon wall. They didn't find Billy the Kid. The story spread like wildfire, carried by the telegraph, by weary travelers, and by the wind itself. The official reports called it an act of savage banditry, but in the dusty saloons and around the lonely campfires, a different version was told, a legend of a young man who fought the cattle baron's iron fist. The legend didn't speak of William H. Bonney, the boy. It spoke of Billy the Kid, a spectre of justice. From that day on, no one could truly track him. He became the impossible rider, the man who knew the desert's secrets better than the desert knew itself. Sometimes a lone ranch hand, riding late across the Badlands, would swear he saw a distant flicker, a shadow moving too fast, a horseman too young to be real. They heard the faint, echoing sound of a gunshot, the ghost of a Colt's report, carried on the wind. But when they looked, there was nothing. Just the red dust, the harsh sun, and the relentless, silent desert, the territory now haunted by a legend, a shadow, a phantom of the frontier. The kid was gone, dissolving into the very myth he had created.